Putin and Macron just... Wait, there are Russian troops deployed in Moldova? Moldova's an ally? Whenever I talk about Ukraine and Russia with anyone, I feel like I'm the only person in the world who knows about the Budapest Memorandum. So for anyone who's unaware, I wouldn't say every single person. Like I'm not a Macron simp. I really am not. I'm not a fan of Macron. Like from what I read in the article, I don't think there's anything wrong with what he's doing, honestly. I'm real disappointed how Germany has acted in this whole thing. I understand that, but honestly, they're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. See you on the battlefield. Hey, all my Valorant games will finally come to use at least. I'm gonna come in with an op. Bah! Quick scope. Wicked, right? It's that easy. Ukraine crisis. Macron says Putin pledges no new Ukraine escalation. French President Emmanuel Macron has told reporters that President Vladimir Putin assured him that Russian forces would not ramp up the crisis near Ukraine's borders. I secured an assurance that there would be no deterioration or escalation, he said before meeting Ukraine's leader, which I think is a pretty positive thing. However, Russia said any suggestion of a guarantee was not right. Russia has denied any plans to invade Ukraine, but it has assembled more than 100,000 troops near its borders. US officials believe Russia has assembled 70% of military forces needed for a full-scale invasion. Oh, Ukraine. Yeah. We should have an entire stream on how to do the French R because I can't do it. Macron. Rançon. Rancunier. La France. La France. I'm saying it weird now. La France. The tensions between Russia, Ukraine, and the West come nearly 8 years after Russia annexed Ukraine's southern Crimea Peninsula and backed a rebellion in the eastern Donbas region. Moscow accuses the Ukrainian government of failing to implement the Minsk Agreement, an international deal sponsored by Germany and France to restore peace to the east, where Russian-backed rebels control swathes of territory, and at least 14,000 people have been killed since 2014. Le singe est dans l'arbre, yes. Ukraine president wants concrete steps from Putin. President Macron this week is on a diplomatic tour of national capitals trying to find a solution to the crisis in Ukraine. He arrived in the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, on Tuesday after almost 6 hours of talks with Mr. Putin in Moscow on Monday. At a news conference with Ukraine's president Volodymyr Zelensky, Mr. Macron said there was now the chance to make these negotiations move forward between Russia and Ukraine, and that he could see concrete solutions to reducing tensions. He also said there was a shared determination to implement the Minsk Agreement. Any resolution to the crisis could take months, he said, but he repeated that Mr. Putin had told him he would not be behind any escalation. Mr. Zelensky, meanwhile, said he expected in the near future there would be talks between Russia, France, and Germany about resolving the ongoing conflict in eastern Ukraine. But he called on Mr. Putin to take serious measures to reduce tensions. I do not really trust words. I believe that every politician can be transparent by taking concrete steps, he said. That picture, yeah. Can you do the rolled R also? Ugh. I don't know what you mean by rolled R. Anyway, yeah, basically I saw someone animated a GIF of this photo where it was like a seesaw. So you have like Putin and Macron just seesawing, facing each other. The Kyiv meeting came after talks between Mr. Macron and Mr. Putin in Moscow. Mr. Putin hinted progress had been made after those discussions, and that some of Mr. Macron's proposals could form the basis of further joint steps, although they were probably still too early to talk about. A French official later told reporters that the two leaders had agreed that Russia would pull troops out of Belarus at the end of exercises taking place near Ukraine's northern borders. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, however, denied any deal had occurred, although the troops were expected to return to Russia at some point, he said. Has Macron averted a war? By Paul Adams, BBC diplomatic correspondent. The Ukrainian president absolutely doesn't trust Mr. Putin. Openness in the leader is fine, he responded when Macron talked about his frank discussions with the Russian leader, but only if it's not a game. Mr. Zelensky welcomed Emmanuel Macron's support and said the two men had a common vision regarding the challenges facing Ukraine, Europe, and the world. But there were awkward moments. Mr. Macron had to deny he'd cited Finland as a possible model for Ukraine's relationship with NATO, close but not a member. Mr. Zelensky appeared to make light of it, but didn't sound impressed. Mr. Putin says he wants to invigorate the 2014 Minsk agreement, and this is also a challenge for Mr. Zelensky. Signed by his predecessor, in the middle of the war, he fears, as do most Ukrainians, that implementing Minsk in its current form will serve to enhance the authority of the pro-Russia separatists who currently control parts of the Donbas. Mr. Zelensky is basking in a growing measure of international support. Foreign dignitaries are coming in and out of town in a way that Kyiv has rarely seen. This crisis has yet to ease, but seems marginally less acute. So the Spanish R is made using your tongue, and the French one is made using the back of the mouth. Yes, Macron. Yeah, it's vibrating in the back of my mouth. That's what happens. I understand why Zelensky doesn't want to hear a comparison to Finland about Russian relations, especially after what happened in Crimea. But that is what would make the most sense, to find a compromise between Russian interests and Western interests, rather than it being all or nothing, one or the other. That really is what would make the most sense for that country, I think. I don't know if it's achievable anymore now that relations have soured this much, but I understand why Macron would have said something like this, would have compared to Finland. Who is this guy? President Macron's a comparison to Finland, does this mean that they are finished? Okay, good one. The President Macron's diplomatic push later moved to Berlin for a meeting with the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Polish President Andrzej Duda. US President Joe Biden met the German leader in Washington on Monday and threatened to shut down a key Russian gas pipeline to Germany called Nord Stream 2 if Moscow invaded Ukraine. Wait, who threatened to shut down the gas pipeline? Did Biden threaten to shut down the gas pipeline? Or did Scholz threaten to shut it down? This sentence is not clear. I think it's saying Biden is threatening to shut down the pipeline to Germany, which would be really fucking weird. The US president said his country will bring an end to the controversial project. Okay, so it is Biden, which will double Moscow's gas exports to Germany if Russia invades. Chancellor Scholz, on his first trip to Washington since becoming chancellor and facing criticism for his response to the Ukraine crisis, was more ambiguous about the pipeline than Mr. Biden. But Scholz did say that the US and Germany were absolutely united on sanctions against Russia should it invade Ukraine, saying we will do the same steps and they will be very, very hard to Russia. That feels a bit unilateral. Contains some upsetting scenes. Maybe it's not stream friendly. I'm not going to play that video. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has also indicated his support for sanctions. Writing in the Times newspaper on Tuesday, he added that the UK was considering deploying Royal Air Force fighters and Royal Navy warships to protect southeastern Europe. It's kind of weird to me how Macron keeps breaking from NATO. Well, the thing is, French history with NATO in general is, and American interests is very conflictual. If you think about, there is this pretty pervasive line in French internal politics, which is to be independent from the US. I don't remember the exact dates, but basically, yeah, like France refused to be a member of NATO for a very long time. France refused to go to war in Iraq. It is actually a pretty normal thing in French politics to not see ourselves as subservient to not see itself as subservient to the US, basically, and to avoid committing to subserviency. Yeah, so Boris Johnson is going to deploy Royal Air Force, Royal Navy to protect southeastern Europe. So that'll be like in the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. Maybe weird was the wrong word. I meant to say I think it's bad. I don't know. I have the utmost respect, honestly, for when Chirac, for example, refused to go to war in Iraq, and that probably wouldn't have been possible if France was a part of NATO at the time.
I could masturbate, and I could be in pain and like breathing, like spitting my lungs out.
Thanks for the follow, Blackbagged. Feels like the wrong time to be jockeying for points. I don't know. Do you think what Macron is doing is wrong? To be trying to negotiate, to broker peace between Ukraine and Russia? Like, just taking that face value, what this article is describing, I think what Macron is doing is perfectly fine. Like, not taking a hardline stance of taking like trying to de-escalate the situation. Did you watch that Johnny Harris video about Ukraine and Russia? Not yet. I guess we should watch it after this. Based froggies. It depends on your perspective. Diplomacy doesn't work anymore with Russia. I don't think that's true. But if that is true, then what would work? Like just declaring war, deploying like escalating, deploying troops. I do understand why you and like Zelensky in this article are skeptical of Putin's word. He has shown himself to be untrustworthy in the past. But I don't think they don't honor any diplomatic agreements and go back on everything they say because they negotiate in bad faith. Yeah, but look, absolutely, I do believe that Putin will go back on agreements and will negotiate in bad faith if that's in his interest. But I also believe that you can negotiate with someone who's even with someone who is of bad faith, as long as you're aware of what they're looking for. You some kind of compromise could be reached where Putin gets some of what he wants instead of getting it's like, you know, the stick and the carrot. Like Putin probably doesn't want a war either. So like it depends on how the negotiations actually happen, and we aren't privy to that information. But yes, if the negotiations are naive and just assume that everything Putin promises is at face value, then that is probably not very productive. I think it's good because then if France does go to war, then Macron can say, "Hey, I tried. We got to go to war anyway." That's true as well. It does give you the moral high ground to actually have put in the best effort. On going for peace, on suing for peace. I didn't mean to imply we should just declare war and send the nukes. I was trying to say that at this point it's time to stop playing Putin's game and start playing ours. Sure. Like maybe like change negotiation tactics, sure. But I personally I respect what Macron is trying to do here. To broker peace and to bring Ukraine and Russia to the same table, etc. And now China too, right? Yeah, I saw some articles. I wanted to dig into that too. I saw some articles. It was pretty funny. I was looking at the main page of the BBC, and there was like one article saying China and Russia are getting closer in the face of Western of Western adversity, and the next article was like China doesn't want to commit to helping Russia. Like basically two articles right next to each other on the page's feed, saying the exact opposite thing. It was weird. Whenever NATO or NATO allies break from the pack, it just makes everyone look weak, and it feels like Macron is just trying to push for more legitimacy instead of doing what is best for the collective security of Europe and the world. I would disagree. I don't think look, the thing is, NATO is a defensive alliance. Macron breaking from the pack to I wouldn't even call what he's doing breaking from the pack. Macron brokering negotiations between Russia and Ukraine is about arrival about to end. Name on fire and upstream. Blessed time. Hey, Gahin. Macron, and there's nothing in NATO that goes against NATO in a European leader brokering negotiations between another European nation and Russia. I don't really understand the logic there. Perhaps it indirectly undermines the fact that the U.S. was trying to fulfill that role of brokering negotiations as well, in that there's different actors trying to do the same thing. But that's not a NATO thing, and especially to put things in perspective, Macron is currently is at the head of the European Union. He supposedly represents the European Union. Obviously, it's a bit more federated than that, but like the title is his for now. I think he's perfectly entitled to do what he's doing here, and I don't see how it undermines NATO, at least strictly speaking, in what NATO is supposed to be, like a defensive alliance. Ukraine is not even a NATO member. Is that a symbolic thing or a literal thing? It's a literal thing. It just doesn't make him like the president of the European Union, but he doesn't have the same powers as, say, like the U.S. president or the French president over their own countries. But he does have responsibilities and powers, and he represents the European Union. Well, I know that Merkel was the de facto leader of the EU, right? She had the most primacy. Yes, she had like actual influence, even when she didn't have the title. That is true as well. And Macron but Macron right now has the title. That's what I meant, officially speaking. I don't remember the exact name of the title. I'm sorry. I need to like look it up again. It's basically a rotation. Every EU member ends up it's like rotating between every EU member. Do you remember what we discussed about the submarine debacle? A little bit, yeah. Yeah, I remember our exchange on that subject. The collective security of Europe and the world will not be enhanced by more conflict in Ukraine. To be frank, I agree. Yes, there's nothing to gain in conflict in the Ukraine, except if the conflict is started by if. But the thing is, I don't see it happening in any other way. But like, except if Russia invades Ukraine, then there is an argument that it needs to be stopped. Though there can also be a humanitarian argument that no matter which way the war goes, they would probably be better served by just being taken over by Russia. But I think that also would be isn't going to work out, because a lot of people will probably be ready to lay down their lives and would prefer to die than to submit. So I know, hopefully it doesn't come to that. Basically, my opinion was that it was just a way for Macron to save face at home, and that it's pretty childish to everyone else, which you more or less agreed with, if memory serves. Less the childish, but more the same face. Yeah, definitely. I agreed about that. There were other motivations too, in my opinion, which this could be an extension of as well. The motivations of Europe being able to stand up for itself without necessarily relying on the U.S. This just feels similar to me. That it's more about Macron trying to establish himself instead of presenting a unified front. But there is no unified front. Like France has sent, there is a unified front, and France is a part of it. France has sent aid to Ukraine. The only thing where it's not a unified front, I guess, is on the communication, in that Macron is saying that by securing an assurance that there would be no deterioration or escalation, he contradicts the U.S. intelligence report that Russia is setting up for a false flag attack into an escalation. But that is not an international consensus. That is not a NATO consensus. That is a U.S. intelligence. That is a U.S. intelligence report that other intelligence agencies don't necessarily agree with. There is not a consensus on that. Also, literally speaking, he is just bringing back what Putin said in their meeting, that Putin officially committed to no escalation. So obviously, if clandestinely Putin, Russia does set up a false flag attack, and that would allow Putin to still escalate without having really escalated because he was attacked first. That's what a false flag attack would mean, obviously. So it could be weasel words. Would it be unfair to say that Macron went to Russia and came away humiliated to an extent? That's not what this article is describing. No. I don't think that would be fair to say. I don't think negotiating and coming back with a commitment is being humiliated. Because that's what I've read people say, and from what I've read, it seems that happened. If you can link me an article on that perspective, I'd be interested on why people think that. But that's not the perspective of this article. And I haven't finished reading it yet. I found this interesting. It is long though. Bad faith nada. Just stuff on Twitter, but I can look again, like global security accounts. Yeah, I genuinely also feel awkward about the sort of consensus that that formed very, very quickly in the US that there is going to be war. Like, it's almost fatalist. Like I know that's not what you're saying, but it also almost amounts to, like, now brokering for peace with trying to de-escalate is seen as breaking the ranks and going against I don't think anyone said there will be war. That's literally what a bunch of articles say. That I mean, that's what the intelligence reports say. That they say that Russia is setting up for a false flag attack in order to escalate into military action. So basically, trying to prevent that happening at this point is almost like a betrayal of the US. You don't like bad empanada, Neyman? I actually don't have a strong opinion on him for or against, but some people whose opinion I respect don't really like him, so I'm a bit skeptical. That doesn't mean that they are literally saying Russia is going to invade March 1st, 2022. That seemed to... Why do I recognize his name? He's a bread tuber. Like, if you're into YouTube, Twitch politics, he'll show up from time to time. That was my understanding of the, like, US media consensus. Russia is going to invade. Tends to fight with a lot of other leftists. I did not know that. I actually don't know him that well. I shouldn't be, like, throwing shade at him. Western country. Anyways, let me finish the article. Maybe I heard from watching Destiny years ago. Oh yeah, Destiny got into like several arguments with him already. Western countries have already rejected a number of Moscow's demands, including that the NATO Defense Alliance rule out Ukraine becoming a member, and that it reduce its military presence in Eastern Europe. They have instead suggested other areas of negotiation, for example, talks on cutting back nuclear weaponry. The tensions between Russia and the West were laid bare during Putin's news conference with the French president. Putin repeated earlier warnings that should Ukraine join the Western military alliance NATO and attempt to take back Crimea, which Russia annexed 8 years ago, Europe would get sucked into a major conflict. Do you want France to fight with Russia? He asked French reporters. That's what will happen, and there will be no winners. Okay, a map showing the Russian deployments. Wait, there are Russian troops deployed in Moldova? Moldova's an ally? I was not aware of that. Anyways. Oh, that's the end of the story. Okay. Alright, let's stay on the subject. Let's check out the those videos.
The Russian invasion of Ukraine. Momentum is building for a war between Ukraine and Russia.
Tensions between Russia and the West are growing rapidly.
President Biden
It's a bit loud, right?
considering deploying thousands of troops to Eastern Europe.
There are now 100,000 troops on the eastern border of Ukraine. Russia is setting up field
Dramatic clips of someone writing on a map.
This is what preparation for war looks like, a legitimate war.
Ukrainian troops are watching and waiting, saying they are preparing for a fight.
The U.S. has
This music
ordered
like straight out of
families
Deus Ex,
embassy
yeah.
staff to leave Ukraine. Britain has sent all of their non-essential staff home. And now the U.S. is sending tons of weapons and munitions to Ukraine's army. And we're even considering deploying our own troops to the region. I mean, this thing is heating up. Meanwhile, Russia and the West have been in Geneva and Brussels trying to talk it out and sort of getting nowhere.
The message is very clear. Should Russia take further aggressive
All right.
actions against
This is more than a week ago. Just to put things in perspective, this is before the Macron diplomatic tour. Not that I think Macron will like single-handedly change the situation, but this is some old shit. I mean, it's not old, but this is a situation that is changing rapidly, and so I think it's important to keep in mind when this was made. I'm subbed to Empanada channel. Okay.
Ukraine, the costs will be severe and the consequences serious.
It's a scary, grim momentum that is unpredictable.
Would I
and the
enlist?
chances of miscalculation
I really don't
and
want to
escalation
ever be a soldier.
are growing. I want to explain what's going on here, but I want to show you that this isn't just typical geopolitical behavior, stuff that can just be explained on the map. Instead, to understand why 100,000 troops are camped out on Ukraine's eastern border, ready for war, you have to understand Russia and how it's been cut down over the ages, from a Slavic empire that dominated this whole region to then the Soviet Union, which was defeated in the 90s. And what you really have to understand here is how
was
that
World War
history
III.
is
I don't know that we'll have a
transposed
choice.
onto the brain of
Absolutely.
one man, this guy, Vladimir Putin.
If I don't
This
have
is
a choice, I
story
don't have a
about
choice.
regional domination and struggles between big powers, but really,
I wouldn't
it's the
enlist,
story
I
about
guess,
what
what I'm saying.
Vladimir Putin really wants.
Russian troops moving swiftly to take control of
I could
military
avoid it.
bases in Crimea.
Russia is amassing more than 100,000 troops and a lot of military hardware at the border with Ukraine.
See you on the battlefield. Hey, all my Valorant games will finally come to use at least. I'm gonna, dude. I'm gonna come in with an op. Bah! Quick scope. Wicked. Right? It's that easy. I'm sort of like piecing together an idea before I really think about it, so bear with me. But in my opinion, if you are part of a security alliance like NATO that bargains, acts from a position of strength based on collective will, when one member steps outside of that collective, it undermines everyone. But Macron isn't stepping out of the collective. Biden, just as much as Macron, wants de-escalation and wants a peaceful resolution to the situation. That's also what I don't really understand. Western media have been hyping imminent invasion every day with headlines like Russia invasion date set, based on a Western analyst saying the ground will freeze in February, so that would be a nice day for war. Yeah, I read that article as well, Milton Kitano. Yeah, that's why I'm saying, like, it actually is that's actually what the fucking articles say. And the, like, analyst reports say. Or some analyst reports say. For instance, like, a players' union is a pro sports league. The NBA doesn't want individual players negotiating with team owners. They explicitly forbid it. And any CBA discussion has to be done through the union. Sure, yeah. But like I was saying, NATO isn't officially, at least, it isn't supposed to be a diplomatic alliance. NATO isn't supposed to. It's supposed to be a defensive alliance. It isn't supposed to be an alliance where individual members have to follow a collective diplomatic line. In practicality, it is. Well, not really. No, obviously not. But yeah, also, like I was saying, it's complicated. Ukraine is not a member of NATO. It's also a European issue, not a US issue. I don't know. I don't. To the very least, it looks like it on the outside. I don't know. I find it strange to say that when, like, it's just as strange for me to say that as to, I don't know, when like Putin goes to visit Belgium to like for diplomatic discussions with the EU. Is the EU undermining NATO? I just don't buy that argument. Really not. I'm sorry. Let's get drafted into war. Yay. Putin owns the black market. He needs the Ukraine to check a border to traffic his goods. I know that idea that a lot of Russian oligarchs are tied to criminal markets and criminal activities. I don't know that Putin himself is tied to it, but maybe there's like a secondary interest like that. They are there for different purposes. No. Wait, which part of what I said you're responding to? One is EU business. One is NATO business. Yes and no. It's he went to visit the EU to talk about Ukraine. Ukraine is not just NATO business. That's what I'm saying. Ukraine is Europe's business, and it's only NATO business because most of Europe is in NATO. You know what I found weird? I found weird when like Biden and Putin met without having even at least like Zelensky being part of the discussion. Like as if Biden, I remember that meeting, and it was described like as if Biden could like speak for Ukraine and the rest of Europe without consulting them. But hey, the US has interest in the region too. I think it's normal for leaders to be negotiating. But yes, but I also get your point. Obviously, like, it's the thing of like many different people trying to accomplish the same thing. It might mix things up. I don't know that it would even be possible for all groups to agree. Like in the article we just read, for example, you have Biden saying, declaring in very strong words that if there is a war in Ukraine, it will be an end to the gas pipeline project. And then the German chancellor, who is directly concerned by the gas pipeline project, being like, we will follow the US in sanctions, but not saying anything about the gas pipeline. Nord Stream, yes, Nord Stream 2. So what I mean is that it's not France breaking out, it's that NATO is not a collective, united diplomatic bloc. It just isn't. Germany is looking out for its interests. France is looking out for what it perceives to be its interests. I'm real disappointed how Germany has acted in this whole thing. I understand that, but honestly, they're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. Like, Germany should have had a better energy policy in the past 20 years, and then it wouldn't even be in this situation. But Germany has had a bad energy policy for the past 20 years. And they're kind of like, they're stuck. They actually need the gas pipeline. They need to buy electricity from other European countries, and that puts them in a really tough diplomatic situation to start talking about sanctions and pressure against their energy trade partners. Wait, how does a better energy policy get us cheaper gas? it doesn't get you cheaper gas, but it allows you to, if you had a better energy policy over the past 20 years, you would be less reliant on gas. And if you are less reliant on gas, you could maybe European gas would be enough. We use the gas for heating directly, not to generate electricity to heat. The both systems work. There are many places in many places in the world where you can use electrical heating instead of gas heating. But I understand the infrastructure is already there for gas. I understand that. So, and that obviously adds another layer of complexity. It feels real bad if other people have to suffer because of bad German policies. Nothing new, I guess. Good one. This is getting confusing. I can only understand geopolitical events with country balls. True. NATO is using the population to influence the liberal community they organize to destroy, like, the American Democratic Party. I don't understand what you're saying, Space Dawn. This is overly simplistic, but it just feels at the moment like every single person involved in this situation is acting suboptimally. Yeah. I wouldn't say every single person. Like, I'm not a Macron simp. I really am not. I'm not a fan of Macron. But I do think in this specific situation, like, from what I read in the article, I don't think there's anything wrong with what he's doing, honestly. Hey, I'm just zooming out. Sorry, I'm including the US in this to be clear. Okay. Privet. Okay. I'm sorry, I don't speak Russian, so I need to translate what you're saying. Privet, что смотришь? I'm watching a video about... Я не понимаю английский язык. No to английский стрим. Извините, это английская стрим. Fuck, I wish I spoke Russian. I actually think it's a really beautiful language. Да, английский. Просто зашел посмотреть тебя. Okay. Спасибо. I did a meme. I guess you could also apply to most of continental Europe. Yeah, Germany really screwing Ukraine with that Russian gas. B Netherlands. Yeah, I'm pretty sure the only European country that I know that has big natural gas reserves is France. There might be a couple others, but I think my view of Russian has been tainted by Russia. Getting ready for that Russian occupation, are you? Yeah, of course. I think on its face, at least, I would agree that it's kind of weird for Biden to kind of just speak for Ukraine, the rest of Europe, without consulting them, if that's even the case. I'm sure we don't really know the specifics. But I also think that it's pretty obvious that this is about the US and Russia, and Ukraine is caught in the middle, which is sad. Yeah, that's fair. And in the past, NATO has been extremely effective in checking Russia, Putin's influence, and guaranteeing safety and stability for Eastern Europe in general, yes. But honestly, the problem is, like, there are two fundamental problems that make it really hard to see an immediate resolution, right? If we look pre-Crimea, in my opinion, pre-Crimea, the obvious solution is for Ukraine not to join NATO, to do what Macron suggested, for Ukraine to become kind of like Finland, where it plays both sides. It does some trade partnership with Russia, does some deals with the EU. And it just, like, sits in the middle because it's geographically in the middle. Like, that's kind of where its interests lie. There's no advantage for Ukraine in being fundamentally opposed to one or the other, right? But post-Crimea, it's much more complicated. Like, Russia has shown that it's gonna fucking roll over them if it wants to take something. And that makes it kind of necessary for there to be protection. I z kakoj ty strony? Ja z Rosji. Ja z polski, amerykański I francuski. I don't know if those are the right words in Russian. I am Polish. Ja, Polak, Amerykanec i Francuz. And when the US tries to lay out the plan and say this is this and that and etc., and extremely powerful and influential parts of NATO, such as France or Germany, step out of the collective umbrella, it undermines their own interests, which is strength through unity and everything we've discussed. Yeah, but I mean, like we also discussed, like specifically for Germany, for example, it's fucked. Like the US can't. Unless we build a pipeline from the US to Germany where we can pump some like fracking gas through the ocean, the US can't really give Germany what it's needing right now. You know what I mean? Especially when it comes to Macron, and I understand that I'm showing my bias and bringing up what we discussed before about the subs, etc. But I think a lot of people outside France feel this way. That it's more like cheap points at home that is endangering the legitimacy and teeth behind NATO. I just fully disagree for what I already said. Like I think negotiating is just ship Germany about a bunch of AA batteries. Yeah. I think at the very least it has to be acknowledged that stepping up to try to negotiate things is comes from a place of goodwill. Of wanting to resolve the situation more than like a self-interested trying to score points at home thing. French people right now honestly don't really like current as far as the election is concerned. No one's really talking about Ukraine or Russia. It's not a domestic politics thing from what I can tell. Now I'm not saying it's altruistic either. But, yeah. Sorry if I distract you with the translation to Russian. I'm ashamed of what Russia is doing now. It is important to understand that not everyone in Russia supports the policy of the Russian authorities. Okay, I understand. Yeah, and I respect that you don't buy into the like let's see if I can say it in Russian. I understand and respect that. Ja это понимаю и уважаю. This is one Twitter thread I was referring to before. You may have seen it already. I haven't really looked at the Twitter stuff concerning this. It's not a domestic politics issue yet. Well, yeah, not yet. Class on Ukraine is in session. I'm going to explain why the progressive call for diplomacy on Ukraine is hollow, lacking in facts, and devoid of context by introducing you to a piece of diplomacy that was supposed to prevent this Russian-made crisis from happening. Okay, who is this? Host, Black Diplomats Podcast, Foreign Affairs Journalist. My thesis is simple. Diplomacy often doesn't work because A, one or all sides is a bad actor, in this case Putin. The promises, treaties, memorandums, etc. are broken. For example, Minsk I, Minsk II. The diplomatic effort was flawed from the jump, and this takes me to the 1994 Budapest Memorandum. Oh, finally! Oh my god, finally! Fucking... Dude, whenever I talk about Ukraine and Russia with anyone, I feel like I'm the only person in the world who knows about the Budapest Memorandum. So for anyone who's unaware, and he's explaining it here, it was a trilateral deal where Ukraine were willing to get rid of their nuclear weapons stockpile in exchange for signing a contract between Russia and the US, where both countries promised to guarantee Ukrainian borders, in exchange for which Ukraine would proceed to nuclear disarmament. That is such, like, both in particular Russia. Obviously, Russia completely broke that agreement by invading Crimea, and that is really fucking horrible. But also, something I have to say, that treaty, just on paper, that treaty is full justification for the US to go to war with Russia. The US has committed to defend Ukrainian borders against foreign aggression. It's black on white. But the US didn't do it. Russia outright invaded them. That's a really good point. He explains what I just said in more and better words. After the fall of the USSR, Ukraine had the third biggest nuclear stockpile in the world, as they were left over from the USSR. Ukrainian leadership at the time believed that Moscow still wanted to invade them, and they were right. Duma officials were discussing such a possibility. In Washington, there was a big priority on getting Ukraine to ditch those weapons. I won't get into the weeds, but many of Ukraine's ICBMs could hit the US, and there was a fear that Ukraine could not secure them properly and that they would get into the wrong hands. Keep in mind that Yugoslavia was also breaking up at the time and escalating to civil war. There were real fears of conflict across Europe and that nukes could be used and sold off. That was a terrifying possibility that kept Washington up at night. Washington went to Ukraine and asked them to give up their nukes because it'll make everyone safer. In everyone, the Americans meant them, lol. Because their long-range nuclear missiles were pointed at the US and could literally destroy every major US city 50,000 times over. At the time, Ukraine was told that the US would help retire their stockpile because Ukraine could not afford to. Ukraine didn't immediately give in to US requests because they didn't trust Moscow. Keep in mind that Russia never saw Ukraine as independent because Ukraine was always Little Russia to folks in Moscow. Ukraine is viewed in Moscow as a breakaway region that has to be broken to submission. That context matters if you want to understand the Ukrainian side. Ukraine was dominated by a number of ethnic groups, including Mongols, Lithuanians, Poles, Austrians, and Swedes, as well as, eventually, the Russian Empire during the reign of Catherine the Great, as Vox points out. Yes, bring back the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. That is the solution to peace in Eastern Europe, okay? Fucking look at the size of it. Look at this. Look at this unit, dude. Look at the size of this fucking unit. Imagine that country, okay? Anyways, enough memes. Back to the thread. So Ukrainians have been used to being the subject of other nations for hundreds of years, including several hundred under brutal rule of Russia in its various political states. There has, bring back Prussia, there has hardly been a 50 to 60 year span in which Ukraine's borders have not shifted for some reason. Let's get to the Budapest Memorandum. Kyiv signed the document, but, as I said earlier, it was flawed. It was a non-binding agreement signed by Washington, Moscow, and Kyiv. Also, it said neither state would pressure Ukraine economically and that they would not use nukes against Kyiv. By the way, non-binding means the memorandum was not legally enforceable. Okay, I did not know that it was not legally enforceable. Which means America didn't have to come to Kyiv's aid if Moscow reneged. That's a terrible deal. They should have had Trump negotiate for them. Trump would have gotten them the best deal, okay? Instead of a Budapest deal, it would have been a Buda Dank deal. The most racist authoritarian country the world has seen in a Budapest deal, exactly, in the century. I'll catch up on chat in a second. I want to keep I'll keep reading this. Here in Ukraine, a retired Ukrainian general told me the memorandum was a piece of toilet paper. He wasn't wrong. My point is that, as flawed as the Budapest memorandum was, Ukraine negotiated in good faith, and there isn't any time in the past 30 years when Ukraine didn't do so. Moscow, on the other hand, broke every line in the agreement since 1994. Be it meddling in Ukrainian elections, especially in Crimea, pumping Ukraine with Russian-language disinformation, or threatening Ukraine with gas politics, Moscow has been bullying Kyiv because their people never bought into Novorossiya, or New Russia. So here's where I get on progressives on diplomacy. Diplomacy has not worked since 1994. There have been at least 5 to 6 documents between Ukraine and Russia dealing with conflicts that Moscow started. At what point does one ask if diplomacy is working? And while the US was not legally bound to provide military support to Ukraine under Budapest Agreement, they did give a handshake, as murky and unclear as it was. That the US is providing some military aid is a moral obligation under that 1994 agreement. Does America really want to sign pieces of paper only to leave our allies in the lurch? Should America help a sovereign nation protect itself? The 1994 agreement was a moral commitment, at the least, and the US is obligated to fulfill at least that. I also find it funny how people evoke Iraq and call for peace. I wonder if those same folks calling for peace, if given a second chance, would have allowed the Rwandan genocide to take place, or have allowed the Bosnian genocide to go unchecked. NATO responded to the latter. Okay, this is a really awkward comparison, because the Iraqi war was unjustified. Not that Saddam was a piece of shit, but the Iraqi war really was unjustified. That the other examples are good. The Rwandan genocide, the Bosnian genocide, sure. Those are examples of international intervention, or like in the first case where international intervention should have happened, in the second case where international intervention did happen and it helped, sure. But I would not have quoted Iraq in here. That's kind of an anti-example. I thought the same, but I think that what he was saying is that in hindsight it's easier to say that, whereas at the time it wasn't so obvious. I mean, that's a big yikes because of the fucking not like what you're saying, but I mean the big yikes is the whole trusting the US on reasons to go to war against the country thing. Like the US lost a lot of legitimacy and trust in doing that for good reason. I also wondered if he meant the first Gulf War instead of the Iraq invasion from 2000. Oh, that's a good point. Maybe he means the first Gulf War. Maybe he means the Kuwait War. Sure. It's not clear from the sentence. Neyman. Okay, let me catch up on chat for a second. Let's see. I don't think it's that simple that being in NATO means you are in zero fear. Like, Neyman is just talking pacts of defense get broken all the time. I don't think Russia would be bold enough to invade a NATO country. I don't think you can just swipe it aside as no fear of invasion. I don't know. Переведи moje сообщение, которое я написал выше. Dobra. Yep. Sorry. My name is Slava. I'm 22 years old. Any person, and I, too, can be put in jail for my opinion. I don't write anything bad. I'm afraid to write such messages on the internet, but fear must be overcome. Damn, that's... Let's see. You are brave. How do you pronounce it?
Ты храбрый.
Ty chrabry. Just have Poland annex Ukraine, issue solved. Hells yeah. I'm down. I'm down for that. I'm joking. It was extremely obvious at the time that the Iraq invasion was utter bullshit. I feel like that's a bit easy to say, but I don't know. It was totally justified to be skeptical back then as well. It was totally justified to be skeptical of it already back then. But the problem was Dick Cheney showing up at the UN with a bottle of piss and being like, this is not wait, what's her name? This is not Belle Delphine's piss. This is actually chemical weapons of mass destruction. And like, it's hard to sit there and be like, wow, the vice president, like he was vice president at the time, right? Like the US he did that, yeah. That was the justification for the Iraq war. It was Dick Cheney showing up, and he showed like satellite images of supposedly factories where Saddam Hussein was allegedly preparing chemical WMDs, stuff like that. And he like did a whole song and dance in front of the UN to justify the war. It was hard. I was young at the time. I don't think I really had a strong opinion on it either way. But I definitely didn't look at that and think, I have to be skeptical of this. You know what I mean? Or at least I don't remember thinking that. Maybe I was, maybe I wasn't. But I don't know. God bless you. You should be saying na zdrowie. So it's up. We are a Russian stream now. Also, I have seen no progressive provide any direct policy solutions to Ukraine other than we want peace. That is so naive because one party, Russia, clearly doesn't. All Ukraine is asking for is aid so they can shoot back at their oppressors. We owe them that. The 1994 Budapest Agreement may not be legally binding, but it was a moral and very real diplomatic approach that ended up not being honored by Russia because they had no intention of abiding by it, because they suffer no consequences if they don't. Putin, his inner circle, need to be sanctioned. Certain financial institutions should be hit. They need to be cut off from world organizations. Oligarchs who pimp K Street for lobbying influence need to be restricted to Russia, the country they steal from to offshore money in the US. So far, progressives are coming off as weak and show they are not prepared to protect the US from real-world threats. Of course, I don't want America at war, but this scenario is not Iraq, and to suggest that shows folks are ignorant about the threat Russia poses. If progressives' response is to ultimately do nothing to support Ukraine beyond releasing statements calling for peace, then say that. I don't care if folks disagree with me. What I do care about is talking points that show progressives understand the issue, and they clearly don't. I want diplomacy to work. Most of work is about cutting military spending and banning nuclear weapons. I'm not a hawk at all. Those folks don't like me at all. I do care about defense and supporting allies and some types of intervention, most of which aren't US boots on the ground. Ukrainians don't want US soldiers on their land. They don't want Russians on their soil either. They just want to be left alone to choose their own destiny. The US is obligated to help them see that destiny, even if it means sending them lethal aid to ensure they live to see it. I don't disagree. I do think it's perfectly justified for most Western countries to continue sending weapons to and training to Ukraine. None of us in here are normal, except Neyman and Nept and Ximos. Two of them are my role models, but I won't tell you which. It's not me. It can't be Ximos either. So I don't know. I'm gonna assume. Anyways. It takes a knowledge of the past many decades of US lies and bloodshed, to be frank. Yeah. Yeah, to have a healthy skepticism of, like, US press releases. Wait, someone stopped Estonia? Wait, did Germany stopped Estonia from sending weapons to Ukraine? I was not aware of that. You're a role model. Oh my god. Hey, let's talk about kinks. Let's have a discussion about pegging, okay? And see if you still see me as a role model. Okay, let's not get sidetracked. If I start talking about sex, we're never getting back to politics. Like I said earlier, here's where hindsight comes in. Part of the idea was economic coupling and thus creating common basis. It worked great with France. I think the problem with Russia is that over the years, China has emerged as a stable trading partner for them. I don't know if it's enough to afford the Nord Stream getting cancelled, but they definitely have some backup. I think it's also fair to acknowledge like a bit of what Terrell Germain Starr is saying here, which is that Putin has shown himself not to be a good faith actor when it comes to diplomacy and partnerships. I think that's also a big issue here. Let's be real, it's not like those weapons will make any difference if Russia actually invades, but sure. Well, the thing is the weapons don't need to you could also make an argument that when it comes to diplomacy that's on the brink of war, it's not it's not about the weapons making Ukraine capable of winning against Russia. It's about making the invasion as costly as possible as a deterrence, right? If foreign aid can make the Russian army think twice about any shenanigans, then that also is progression, diplomatically speaking. Hashtag Macron bad president. Why is this trending?
I go on my knees in the night, saying prayers in the street light.
He ignores Macron and then shakes Merkel's and Trump's hands. This is old, though. We were talking about some stuff from the East German military, if I recall correctly. Oh. Good faith actors are a meme with no basis in reality. I don't think that's entirely true. Look, turn it. It's like in game theory. In game theory, the best usually the best strategies are those that implement some form of the golden rule, that recognize that that another strategy that is betraying them is needs to be treated as an adversary, but another strategy that is that cooperates with them has to be seen as a good faith actor. It has to be seen as a cooperator. You want to believe that it's not true, and you want to believe that it's true. Like I can tell you that you want to be really cynical about it. No actor is capable of a coherent good faith strategy and ends up with a realist strategy. To a certain extent, I actually agree, but I don't think I don't think egoism is the opposite of acting in good faith, or even necessarily the opposite of altruism. You can act egotistically, but recognize that your interests align with others' interests, or that cooperating is better for your own selfish motives. And most of the time, that is the truth. Cooperation, it's not always true. Not everything fits into game theory rules, but usually cooperation is actually the best outcome. It's not egoism. Countries are systems, not people. Selfishness, if you prefer. It's selfishness in the you know very well what I'm talking about. You're arguing that countries will only ever act in their own interest. That's what you're saying when you're talking about a realist strategy. And I'm just saying that is true, but that also doesn't mean that you cannot have good faith cooperative diplomacy. No, I'm not arguing that at all. Okay, then I didn't understand what you were saying. Ferret lol, countries will mostly only act in their own interest. A lot of the humiliating stuff I was talking about are things like this, by the way. Macron having to walk through the airport instead of having a motorcade. The gigantic meme table, stuff like that, which admittedly has no bearing or significance on reality, but symbolically or whatever, it makes him look like he was fooled. Yeah, I mean, this scene looks bad. I like that it's an anti-vax. It's an anti-vax French nationalist that shares this. Like, yeah, Putin humiliated our president. Go France. Good one, buddy. Putin has humiliated Macron by keeping him at long distance. Yeah, people. I really don't like this kind of very superficial level analysis of those things. You've heard the term unforced error, I'm sure, right? Yeah. I really don't like those kinds of this kind of like very superficial analysis. By the way, BFM TV is Fox News level media in France. Just to give some perspective, okay? We will never get to the ferret video. I'm sure we will get to the ferret video. Anyways, yeah, let's actually go back to the videos. Why is the table so goddamn big? Apparently to humiliate Macron. I don't fucking know. Maybe it's, hey, it's the fucking it's, you know, the distanciation, you know, for COVID. You can't sit too close to each other. Oh yeah, I agree. It does have an impact on people. I agree with you, So. I'm saying countries can't have a coherent strategy, especially strategies that anthropomorphize systems, so you end up with mostly ad hoc reactions. I disagree. Like this whole anthropomorphization thing, I feel is also social distancing. Yeah, it is also a bit of a weird like. A bit of a weird argument for me. You've been throwing that at me for a while, but maybe they just want to be in a Wes Anderson movie, true. It's like the Iron Throne. This video literally anthropomorphizes Russia in the title. Like, turn it. Countries are led by people. And those people, especially in authoritarian countries, make decisions as to the directions and stances that the countries will take. That is not a controversial statement. Ferrets don't cook. True. This is actually an anthropomorphic stream anyways. This is a furry stream.